Right, so your name, date of birth.
My name is Michael John Gilkes. My date of birth is 31/08/23, the 31st of August 1923, and actually I was born in Montreal, Canada, because my mother was in fact involved in a Canadian song recital tour at that time. But I soon, and she soon came back to Britain, to England, which shall we call it, to the UK. I didn't think I used any of those terms, but I did come back in 1926 in the Berengaria, which previously had been one of the flagships of the great German pre-war transatlantic liners. I think there's that, yes, and I grew up in Birmingham, where my mother and father were both involved in lecturing and teaching. My father was in fact a classicist and had many Workers' Educational Association classes, and my mother was a professional musician, singer and pianist. People always thought she was a singer only, but in fact she won the gold medal of the Royal Academy of Music when she qualified in about 1908, and we were always rather pleased with the idea that actually she beat Mara Hess to the medal at that time. Stop. Give it a rest.
I'll just leave that running because it's got batteries and a new card.
And if we could come on to, put it on again, the music. If we come on to a question of toys and playthings, my first memory actually isn't of a toy. It is that I was in a little nursery school in the town of Thame, which is just east of Oxford, and I was in a little garret room upstairs, and one of my very earliest memories is of waking up, and there was a large owl perched on the end of my bed, and I think that caused me a certain amount of disconcertment. Anyway, as far otherwise, I think it was a very happy little school, nursery, and then about 1926 we actually moved over to Princess Risborough, and I remember on that occasion I didn't have it, but somebody had one of the large wooden triangle pull-along tank toys, tank engine toys, and I also have a memory, and I think it's one of the reasons why I collected them later, of the early Bing tabletop. That was the very first 00 gauge miniature railway. One of the other children had it, and I certainly recall we were played with it in the garden, a clockwork set at that time. And so I think those are my earliest sort of partly toy and plaything recollections. And then we moved to settle down in Birmingham in the suburb of Selly Oak, and in fact we're in the Selly Oak vicarage because my father was a good friend of Bishop Barnes of Birmingham, who was fairly well known for his trenchant views on all sorts of things at that time, and had been at Shrewsbury School, where my father had been a master, and my grandfather had been a housemaster, and so on. A very strong educational connection all through my early first 20 years. Anyway, the interesting thing was, I say, we were living, although we had no religious practitioners in the family at that time, we were living in Selly Oak Vicarage. And again, an early memory was, I must have been about 4 or 5 at the time, going with my Irish governess, walking across the Bristol Road down to Bourneville and watching the Bourneville Cadbury special liveried tank engines and trays shunting alongside the canal, where the canal and the Cadbury works are situated. I think we'd better just stop there for a minute. Is this the sort of stuff you want?
It's all good, yes, yeah. We move on to
yes, well,
how you sort of got into the particularly the construction. You said Lotts and Meccano and that sort of thing.
It was about this time, again about 1928, that one of my earliest toys, which we have good examples in the Toy Museum here, were of baby tractors, which were interesting little things. You were going to see them in the showcase here, because possibly the only worldwide collection of animate toys is here. And they were interesting because they said push slowly backwards, never push forwards, because if you did, you upset the mechanism. If you did them the right way, they then moved nicely, slowly, and will go up a small hill. But of course, inevitably, 4 or 5-year-old children would tend to push them forwards as well. But I would suggest it's very worthwhile going to look at the appropriate showcase, because they also produced toy tractors with rubber tracks, rather bigger. And interesting thing, making the date, is that on the boxes it printed certain amount of stuff about Lindbergh, who had just done the first transatlantic flight from America to Paris, and this was part of their animate toys advertising. Animate toys are very interesting because you'll see, if you go and look, there's lovely little World War tanks and beavers and all sorts of other things, as well as the bigger ones. And you are looking, if you do go and look, you are looking at what I believe to be a virtually unique collection, which is not present anywhere, either in the East or West hemispheres. I say, some of them do work still, others, I regret to say, were probably pushed forward, though not in my day.
Yes. Are we offering nice Meccano backdrop? Well, not just that, I haven't told you at an angle so I don't get people's kids in. So if I do that, you don't have to record it. No, I'm going to move this. It's picking them up really nicely. Move that. There we go.
Right, you want to go ahead. It was about this time, I suppose, that my father, being particularly interested in trains, during the First War, after he'd been very badly wounded, he was kept in our islands and was occupied from about 1916 to 18 in inspecting the biscuit factories which were producing biscuits for the forces. This enabled him, in fact, to travel on practically every railway main line in the country, and possibly some of the smaller ones. And so whenever we went anywhere, almost for the rest of his life, if we went under or over a railway bridge, he would be able to say quite clearly where we were. But then this, of course, tied with the fact that he didn't have any, I hesitate to call them toy railways, and yet at that time we didn't really call them modern railways, but they certainly existed. And in the late 20s, I began to have various Hornby trains and train sets. None of them. One always looked at the advertisements in the Meccano magazine. I started with the Meccano magazine, I suppose, quite early, in 1929 or 30. But one had looked in toy shops, but not very, not really thinking one will never have any of these beautiful big engines. But one still had a fair assortment of, at that time, Hornby trains. And of course at that time one also had various Meccano sets, though I think there were always the sets North 1 and 2, the idea of having anything more elaborate with gears or anything like that, at that time, no, one didn't. Stop for a moment.
So what could you make with the sets that you did have?
Oh, one made the rather more elementary things that were in the instruction book, the odd crane, or I think again the problem for the young at any time is if you have a construction set, you suddenly find you haven't got enough nuts and bolts to do what should be. And of course my later experience of Hornby and Meccano, and later, don't let's ignore tricks, which I'm glad to say we have a splendid collection of tricks here, because I remember my experience of the tricks was rather cheaper than Meccano, and so by about 1931-32 you could buy little, there were sets A, B and C, and they were all 1 shilling each, as I recall it, but this enabled you in fact to build up things. And tricks, if you look at the case or are knowledgeable about it, whereas Meccano always had rather well cut gears and things, the tricks tended to have single sprocket gears. They had chain. I would think one's toy cupboard had a number of different things at that time. It's about this time too, about 1930, that I had my first wooden engine, which came from, I think they were called Ransom's. No, there was the best toy shop in Birmingham at that time was situated in the Great Western Arcade, which is practically next door to Snow Hill Station, which was the Great Western Railway Station at that time. And certainly my big, I suppose it was about 3 or 4 foot long engine, which I forget, I didn't know what colours it was, but because at that time and ever since there has only really been one railway, i.e. the Great Western, we had to, somebody had to paint this engine green. Again, I think the paint, I think it may be my Irish governess who got some paint and painted it for me, and I don't think it was the right paint, and I don't think it set properly, and I do seem to recall odd smears of paint in various places. And so, as I say, one never had anything very elaborate at that time, and I suppose one, as with the majority of both children and adults, there was a longing or hankering for things that perhaps one couldn't quite afford. Stop, there we are. Let's let me see, where are we now?
Do you want a cup of tea?
Coffee, please.
Coffee. How do you
Remember,
have
I
it?
have a tea allergy.
Oh yes. Black milk?
No, white with, I don't have sugar, but...
I've got some coconut palm sugar, which is very safe.
Okay.
If you like it.
That'd be good.
Yeah, I thought so.
That'd be good.
All right, so you can just kind of gather your thoughts while I go and arrange that. Well, he's going to carry on, so you're welcome to stay and listen. I'll just pause that.
Remind me, I think we might have something to say about Lost Bricks shortly.
Okay. I'll just leave it.
Is it on? No, it's not on at the moment. Is it on, Digger? No, right.
Yeah, that's the important thing, otherwise you'll have a... Okay, coffee's on its way. This one I'm leaving running the whole time.
Oh, right.
This one I'm switching on and off because it
okay.
only does 10 minutes of video.
Well, what I was going to say was
If you want them, I don't know what we've printed.
that in giving these recollections, well, I think everybody should realise that I was an only child. I cannot say that I ever regretted being an only child, and on the whole, I think it is the happier situation to be in, where you do not have to apparently contest with brothers and sisters. But maybe one can be slightly, I don't know what the right word is, what's the right word when you are given tolerance? Anyway, you know, well, as I say, the only child does quite well, and of course gets quite a number of toys. And, of course, while we were still at the vicarage in Selly Oak, again, I had a lot of farm animals, and they would, of course, have been Britons. And there was a nice little shop just in the main street of Selly Oak on the south side, just before you went down the hill towards Edgbaston, where, again, one used to go and spend the odd, I suppose, and there wasn't a pocket money concept, I think, but, well, things did turn up, and probably, as with many only children, one probably had too many toys, but I in no way regret them. So one certainly had a farm, like you'll see in the toy museum here, and while in later years, of course, there have been many other makers of farm animals and models of animals and zoos and so on. There's no doubt that Britons then and ever since have still been the prime one. Bearing in mind, of course, that it wasn't only farm animals, there was a strong field of model soldiers at that time, and model soldiers, Britons used to come in long single-width boxes, and I certainly recall one relative of the family, except that we never really discovered if it really was him, at one Christmas, a box of soldiers turning up, and the question, who did this actually come from? So one had soldiers, and of course, again talking about Britons produced some very splendid model guns, army guns, like the big howitzer, which actually fired. You could load sort of leaden shells and put them into it. It was a thing. I don't know if we've got one here. Have we got one here? If we haven't, I've still got one, which I was thinking about selling, and it really ought to come here. They're splendid. I mean, in the First War, this was the largest gun that you would see pictures of, with big artillery wheels, and I suppose about 10-inch bore. Yes, certainly we must look into that.
Yes.
Do we have model soldiers?
Yes,
we
we
had
do.
them. Where have they gone?
The dioramas are in Belgium. on a special exhibition.
That's right.
But they'll be back next year.
They will, because we haven't got any at the moment.
We have got that gentleman there standing right next to a whole.
So long as the Peace Pledge Union doesn't come after us. When I say I'm not sure it's the Peace Pledge Union, but one of the backgrounds of the time I'm telling you about was, and one of the reasons why we didn't go to war when we should have, was in fact the Peace Pledge Union. And oh no, we've had the war to end all wars, and this is of course one of the reasons why 1938 and 39 happened. Looking around, just once again, I see something that reminds me. There were, of course, various sets of building bricks, and for the more junior, there were very much bricks that boxes of wooden cubes that fitted into one another. I suppose those would be more for age 2 to 3, and I think I was always much too grown up to have anything like that. But certainly, again, at this time, one of the great things was, in fact, Lot's bricks, which were still the best of all bricks. But of course, and I certainly had a number of sets, nothing like as prolific as you actually have in the cases here. The Toy Museum's set of Lot's bricks is superb. But the point is that they're fitted into each other. And one of the interesting things is it was only much later, several decades later, that I suddenly realized that the particular colouring of the roofs of Lot's brick building is in fact very reminiscent of Dutch, as it is today. Yeah. Go into Holland, anywhere in Holland, and possibly northern Belgium, and that's where that came from, I think, because, of course, Lot's bricks were made under license from German brick manufacturers, whose name I forget, but we must get it from Chris. Who were the writers, or have we got them here? That actually the patent of Lot's bricks Well, I tell you why it is important, actually, to...
they all say Watford.
To come round to this. It will come back to me, actually, because, looking very much forward, when Audrey and I went on the Trans-Siberian, Trans-Russian Railway in about 1980, one of our companions on that absolutely splendid trip from London to Hong Kong in various ways was in fact a very splendid Dutch general practitioner doctor, Charles, who became and has remained a great friend. And we discovered that Charles in fact was a major collector of these German bricks. And at one time, in fact, we went over, in fact, because there was a major exhibition of these, some name like Reuters or Reuters.
We'll look it up. Chris will know.
Chris will know. Anyway, that's, so, but to discover later, 50 years later, even longer, that Lot's bricks had this, and of course, magnificent structures have been made, both from Lot's bricks and these other ones. Lego is, I've nothing against Lego. In fact, if Lego was the only thing we could have, splendid. But it's, It's cheating a bit, it clicks together. So there we've got to, ah well, yes. You see, we, in 1929, my father in particular, we acquired a car and we went travelling west of Worcester, because this was in fact my father's early ground when the Gilkes family came from one William Gilkes, mayor and inkmaker of Leominster, Leominster, who about 1850 had 10 children, of whom my father was the son of the eldest of those. Again, mustn't put too much family history into this, but you see, his eldest son, Arthur Herman Gilkes, became the very great Victorian headmaster of Dulwich College, who was later succeeded by his third son, Chris Gilkes, who in 1941 became headmaster of Dulwich College, and the fourth son became the High Master of St Paul's. So I have a rather strong sort of educational background, which probably hasn't rubbed off on me, but has been of interest in people who've come up from one and said, oh, you know, your uncle or your grandfather or somebody used to teach me. Because again, my father, as I say, after First War, did become form master at Shrewsbury, and then decided he got a bit fed up with teaching boys and preferred to be teaching adults, which is one of why we moved to Birmingham. So anyway, back onto the toys. So lots of bricks, and as I say, we then moved down to a lovely old rectory. Again, a religious connection. This was some of our farmer relatives, just west of Worcester, had a quite big farm. They were very famous. In fact, they had breeders of Hereford cattle. Again, I shouldn't digress quite so much, but again, John Walker's father is Lawson Walker of Broadworth, who owned a horse called Team Willow, which won the Grand National, but that's nothing to do with toy museum.
No, but that's worth telling.
Anyway, we moved to the old rectory, Knightwick, 9 miles west of Worcester, and this was, and is, a splendid Queen Anne house, possibly Queen Mary, overlooking the valleys of western Worcester, and amongst other things, of course, it was 3 stories, and of course I and all my toys, which I had at that time, were translated. But one of the nice things was that we had a sort of, what's the word, kind of single-story schoolroom in the grounds, and that became my plaything and nursery, adding, of course, to the fact that, amongst other things, living there, we had pupils, particularly for my father, but also my mother teaching singers and rest of it. And of course, I was not exactly spoiled, but exposed to family life, which I didn't have as an only child. And certainly my recollections was we certainly by that time had Bing tabletop, of which again you'll see a splendid collection in the Toy Museum, and an electric Bing tabletop. And bearing in mind that at that time, west of Worcester, houses didn't have electricity. I grew up there, the 3 years we were there, taking my own paraffin lamp up to bed with me. That was at the age, this was great, what is the word, not an epiphany, the other thing that kind of happened to you, when you were finally allowed to carry the paraffin lamp.
Sort of rite of passage, almost. Almost a rite of passage.
Oh, that's right. And bear in mind, of course, I had candles.
Thanks.
And I mustn't digress too much, but I must digress a little bit about candles, because interesting thing is that there's a splendid book by, what is her name, Flora Thompson, is it? Dark Rise to Candlefoot. Yes. Wonderful book. Everybody should read it. Grew up in Juniper Hill, in a really rural, just north of Oxford, and about how she was growing up and so on, again, without lights, electricity, or even modern sewage probably. But one of the interesting things was that one learns that people, and say this as a one-time practicing eye doctor, people very dubious about various forms of lighting. And one particularly is about candles, and particularly, and I remember being told this, I think, you should not read in bed at night with a candle. Bad for your eyes, damaging your eyes. I might say, in 30 years at the eye hospital here, numerous occasions on which I was told that, oh no, you'll damage your eyes with them. And it wasn't until I read Flora Thompson's book that she gives an account how I think some adult says, Flora, you shouldn't be reading in bed at night, etc. like that. You'll damage your eyes, and in any way, we don't want to be burnt to death in our beds. Because, of course, the actual fear is nothing to do with the eyes, but to do with that if you have a candle by your bed, in a half-timbered house like we were to some extent in the old rectory at Knightwick, people did fall over and the candle did burn them. Anyway, that's a digression, but it's a digression which should be recorded, because I don't think people woke up to the fact that it's Flora Thompson who explained to us that there's no harm in fact, a candlelight is a very good one, but just make sure you don't knock it over on the bed.
Or read under the covers. Maybe don't read under the covers with the candle, like I did with the torch.
How right you are. No, absolutely.
For Andrew's records for the lottery people.
Anyway, why did I get onto...
Because you moved to the rectory and you went upstairs with your paraffin.
And the double O, the tabletop. And see, tabletop is always, I've always loved it because I first exposed to it at the age of 4 or something. It was the very first practical double O, and of course there was this electric version. And one of the visiting families produced the electric double O, where we had in this, what was it, not a shed, it was much more than a shed, single-story schoolroom. That's what it was, the schoolroom in the garden. And we had, lovely, we had the big electric tabletop. Unfortunately, the motor of I think the only engine we had, burnt out. And so this was really rather sad, because it ran from a little battery which you won't find now, which is a little sort of rectangular thing about the size of a mug or a teacup. And so we were deprived of that. And again, one of the sadnesses of my of that age was that somebody else said, that's all right, I was known as Michael in those days, we'll get you another one when I'm up in London. Well, he went to London, and he in fact went to, there's a famous toy shop on the south side of Kensington High Street, just immediately opposite Olympia. I don't think it's there, but Chris will know it. The toy shop opposite Olympia in Kensington High Street. Anyway, he called
Chuffs.
and bought, don't go, because what's the name of the original of the Lots Bricks, the foreigner?
German.
Of Lots Bricks, Anker, Richter.
Richter, that's right, because it is very important that there are large continental, almost anywhere continental, Germany, France, Holland, etc., you'll find they have Richter bricks, and as I say, I did go with this Charles, doctor friend of mine, Dutch, particularly took us to a major exhibition of Richter blocks at Scheveningen, and it was fascinating to discover that, you know, one, to me, Lots bricks were the great thing, but have we got Richter bricks here?
Yes.
We have some.
Yep.
Well, I've just been regaling how one discovered that, you know, Lots bricks were totally good. And I was also regaling, you know why the roofs of Lots bricks are the colour they are? You should, because I've told you on one occasion.
Oh, really?
The roofs in Holland.
Oh, Dutch roofs.
Dutch, well done. Go to the top of the class, little Dale.
Fascinating. Well, I'm glad Richter bricks, that's right. Because as I say, Charles, on his wardrobe in his flat in The Hague, you know, when one suddenly, the shades were lifted from one's eyes, and the whole thing, number of things became apparent that hadn't been. While I'm looking at Chris, I'm looking at the showcase, and of course this takes me back to now 1930. We've moved to Worcester, but eventually decided that I'd got to go to school, and a prep school was found for me in Birmingham called Hallfield, in Edgbaston, Birmingham, and so I wasn't a boarder there, only for a very short while. So in fact we acquired a flat in Bourne Brook, which is in fact in Birmingham, just opposite the university, and so forth. I remember that, I think it would be the Christmas, probably 1930, I had flu or something or the other, and we had a very nice general practitioner, and we were at that time in this flat. We still had the house in Worcestershire, but I and my governess were in the flat. And what was rather nice was on Christmas Day, that doctor came along to see me, and I was in fact getting better, and he had a present for me, which was a Hornby aeroplane kit, just like I see in the window there. I certainly made those, and because this was a time, of course, when Hornby were also producing their motor car kits, and it is about 2 years later, just after we came back to Birmingham, that I was in fact allowed a Hornby #1 car constructor kit, which was very nice. It looked a bit like an MG, open tourer, but again, as always, one wasn't necessarily satisfied with it, because one knew very well that one's friends who had a nice Hornby #2 constructor set, that the #2 was a very much better and more powerful object, which ran for much longer, and trying to race my #1 against the #2. On the other hand, the #2, you'll see them here
There's one in that.
Around the corner. The number 2 had many fewer variations. The number 1 had an open, I don't know, a coupe and something else.
And it had a boat back. One had a boat back.
That's right. Yeah. Oh dear. So long as nobody thinks it's me making that noise. So we've got, we've talked about tabletops, we've talked about rooftop. So anyway, interesting thing, of course, again, this splendid big schoolroom in the garden, not only a site for being tabletop, but by that time one had a rather assorted collection of O-gauge tin plates. Nothing very high class, and certainly no question of sceneries or something, but one did have odd stations. But one also had toy soldiers, and at that time we had certainly 2 of the Britain's howitzers, which one was able to fire across the floor of this schoolroom. Had a nice block-style parquet flooring, and it was interesting the damage that those shells in the Britain's howitzers could do to model soldiers, quite extensive. Yeah. Which reminds me, Chris, that I think I've still got the last of those howitzers at home.
Have you?
Shouldn't we have it here?
In the cabinet over there.
What?
In the cabinet over there, yes.
Is there one there?
No. We should have it, yes.
Well, I think probably you should have it. It's actually worth money.
Got proof now.
Yeah, about 100 quid.
Probably, yeah.
I think possibly.
I think now, we've got some of these memories, it's jogged. If we go into the office and continue without the background noise, that I can ask you some questions then without you having to filter.
Right.
Yeah?
Well, let's see if there's anything.
Well, you could make, if you want to have a short walk round and a think and a break.
No, I know.
No, that's what I thought, yeah.
So you've talked about the tabletop. You've talked about... I actually haven't mentioned the word triangle. What about tricks?
And I ought to mention the word...
He's passed by, yes, he's done tricks.
Oh, you've done tricks, okay.
He's done tricks.
Right, okay.
I ought to mention the word triangle, because triangle is very important.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is.
And I had some too.
Did you mention animate toys?
Started off with them.
Okay. Oh, it's interesting. Good.
Very good. But we carry on in the...
How's it going? All right?
Yes, it's lovely. Lovely. Got loads to work with, but I want to...
You'll have to split it into bits, won't you?
Take you away.
Crazy.
Let's ought to talk about that... not quite right to have coloured Meccano.
Oh,
Not quite right.
You go back to that Meccano.
No, red and green.
Red and green.
Again,
okay.
no,
Okay.
the uncoloured one didn't have at all, but fundamentally it was red-green.
Yeah,
And all this colouring and history. No,
red green is the most classic.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, it is.
Yes, I must get the howitzer out because I think they're amongst the best things that Britain's made.
Oh, they were lovely.
Well, I say, you see, again, my recollection is of Britain's farm toys, Britain's soldiers.
Yeah, very much. Yes.
Right.
It's free for both. No, £3 for the disabled person who want a car, and free for their carer. £3.50, sorry. £3.50, Nadesh.
Good to see you, Michael.
You can't hear you, Peter.
Yeah?
You really shout.
I can't hear mine.
Just shout at each other.
So we'll go in the resource room. There's no one in there, is there?
No.
I've just left this running now because you never know when he's going to come out with a gem.
Previously when I've turned it off and turned it back on.
Yeah, right, okay, fine.
Right, we'll come in here.
We'll come in here, right.
You can come in too, Andrew, if you want. There's 3 chairs. Yes, I will. So it's a bit quieter.
Well, that's right.
So you can hear my questions. And all, indeed, Andrea's. This is Andrea.
Right, fine.
And she is the consultant to the Oral History Project, which has paid for the recording equipment for the... And also we'll be using some of your memories and other people's to develop a book and a website. And the website will also have sign language on it.
Well,
the website will have sign language on it as well. For so all the interviews will be transcribed.
Oh, that's fine. I say, well, I think one has had an interesting life. So did I make the point about being an only child? Yes. The tendency for people to rather think you shouldn't be an only child, but as I say, occasionally people would commiserate with one. But anyway, I was going to just because it still fits in this period. The word triang, I think, is very important because amongst the sort of available toys at that time, one of the great ones were Linesbros, whose brand were Triang. And they made, as we have here, not exactly tin toys, what one should one call them? They are... well, they certainly made prams, pushchairs, tricycles for children, and also as a range of we've got some here up top, splendid steam engines, tin plate, things made of tin plate. I might add that I've talked about my very first pull-along engine, which was this wooden one. That wasn't Triang, and I think one probably actually had a slight feeling at that time that it was a nice engine, but one would have preferred to have a Triang, because the Triang ones actually got up to a size where possibly a 5 or 6 year old could in fact sit it, and I'm not sure they weren't dealing with the coming on the edge of pedal cars at that time, because it was certainly in 1929 or 30 that my birthday present did involve a pedal car to sit in, which was bought in Worcester, very near the Worcester Cathedral, very good toy shop there, which I think is still there. And Triang, as they made this very wide variety of tin plate things, and I'm not sure that there may have been sort of continental, what's the right word, competitors, but I think one never saw them in Britain. We were dealing in British things. Of course, again, another little aspect of these things is that while we often think of Bassetlauk as one of the great model railway producers of the first half of the last century, certain amount of stuff was truly British, but a considerable amount was in fact adaptations of the German toy makers like Bing and I forget the names of the others who will come up. So in fact there was the continental toy industry, rather typically of the British, not recognised, etc. But in fact, when you discover how big it was, in fact, this insularity that we have is quite interesting. Anyway, Triang toys. There are a number around here. I'm looking to see that could almost be a Triang, except it's nothing like good enough.
What, the biscuit tin?
The bus.
Yeah, it's a biscuit tin.
It's a biscuit. Well, there again, you see, we have an interesting aspect. I don't know if we're ever going to get away from the late 20s, early 30s, because one of the aspects of toys of that time, of my time, then, is in fact in the grocers. And splendid tin plate biscuit tins, including certainly, which I think I did, I think like many children I may have coveted something which in fact you couldn't have, because we weren't all that well off. But certainly there was a Flying Scotsman biscuit tin, which I call, with, in fact, I think Huntley Palmer's biscuits, the ones with little sort of icing things on them, small little roundels with. But in fact, the range at that time, and I mean, if you went into the grocers of Birmingham or anywhere else at that time, and around Christmas, there would be quite a range of the biscuit, and of course nowadays, in fact, they command really rather frightening values in auctions. One was glad one didn't have them. So that's, and as I say, Triang, a very, very major aspect of the toy scene, of the toy industry, and I say just, recapitulating, we're talking not only about children's toys and pull-along toys, but prams and all sorts of things. And as I say, they had this big factory at Morden, near Merton, in South London. And of course they went on being a major factor in the toy industry until, sadly, would it be in the 60s or 70s, you suddenly discovered that the liquid, the people had been, what's the right word, they went into administration, yes, that's right. And in fact, they were quality. Well, of course, one of the aspects of that sort of period is that toys, tin plate toys, were still very largely made with the fold-over little tabs. You made them by having component bits which you then pushed over. And one of the things, of course, you had to learn as a child was that if you started undoing tabs on your toys, you probably wouldn't be able to put them back properly, or they broke off rather smartly, and that was a pity. The interesting again, one I suppose there could really be an article on the mendability of toys over the period. And right, so where we're going to go now?
I wanted to ask you, going right back to the Meccano and your early experiences of Meccano, given all the knowledge you've obviously since acquired, how you think that would have helped you to learn in terms of I know you have an overview of engineering, for example, and that kind of, how things are constructed in the big world, as it were.
I don't think that Meccano and real engineering have quite as tight a connection as people tend to think, because I think you know, real engineering is about strains and stresses and the calculus and various other things. No, I think actually Meccano and all the other construction sets, the Lord's bricks, everything is more about manual ability, not dexterity, manual ability, that it's fun to discover that you can put things together and you make them, etc. Indeed, one wonders just, you know, all of the construction sets at any time have instruction books, but to what extent those are followed by the owners who hopefully will have a, what's the right word, not an exploration, will have a certain inventiveness and will try this way. Certainly learn that the gears have got to fit, but nothing like as well as they fit in a gearbox of a car. So I don't think it's it is much more the broadening of the whole individual rather than a specific learning thing. Of course, the interesting thing is that in my time again, tricks construction appeared, and again there is some history. Well, there's a lot of history here. If you asked in the average toy auction audience, what about tricks? I'm not sure you'd find, you will, always find one or two much more informed than yourself people. But on the whole, people have heard of Meccano, but they haven't heard of tricks. And tricks, of course, came from Germany. I think, in fact, as early as the First War, but basically was launched by Hobbies magazine. Hobbies had been around since I think 1890 or thereabouts. I have a fairly complete run of it. A magazine of knitting and carpentry and metalwork and various other things by Hobbies Limited of Dereham, Norfolk, who in fact one of their major products were in fact fret saws. And the fret saw, concept of the fret saw relates of course to jigsaws, which you could make jigsaws without a fret saw, but it was the coming in of the fret saw which enabled the jigsaw, interlocking jigsaws. You see, jigsaws certainly date from about 1750, 1760, but interlocking jigsaws are, I think, really a product from possibly the late 90s onwards. I'm not quite sure. There are books on the history of jigsaws. Tom Tyler, who founded the association, the Confraternity of Dissectologists, Tom Tyler being the sometime Vicar of Henfield. Also a very great collector, may I add, of railways, model railways, so on and so forth. You find people doing all sorts of things there. But I'm not wandering too far from tricks here. But Hobbies magazine, you see, went on and was dealing with all sorts of constructions. The early Bassett Loug, for example, in the 20s, took on Hobbies and ran it for a while as an advertising medium, because again, at the background of all this, one has got to reflect that people aren't doing it because they love toys, people are doing it to make a profit, hopefully. And business is about making profit, irrespective of what you're making. But in fact, Tricks and Hobbies launched a British version of Tricks, and interesting that this was like Meccano, a construction set, And of course, if you look at nobody's, I think I've ever done a fully detailed history of construction sets, because in fact there are enormous numbers of them. For example, after the last war, when metal suddenly became available, we've got again, this is relevant to us here in the Toy Museum. If you look at the appropriate showcase, you'll see just a small assortment of entrepreneurs in 1947-48 finding bits of metal that they could then put together construction sets and sell them. And there is an incredible variety. To some extent this may have eroded the established Meccano course. And of course again you see, well, it's an enormous field, because one's got to remember that we're talking about the Eastern Hemisphere and what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. Erector, the American equivalent of Meccano. Don't think that Erector is a Meccano. No, it isn't. Because again, the trouble with so many of these is they didn't quite match up. And coming back to Trix, Trix had a variety of parts and girders and plates and curves and so on, and they had rather more holes in each of them than Meccano had. But the trouble was that you had to have the specific Trix gauge of screw thread with nuts and bolts. And if you already had a Meccano set and you splashed out your shilling on one of the Trix small envelopes, you took it home, you ran out of the Trix nuts and bolts, and you went to your Meccano set and tried to use, and you discovered that the Meccano bolts, which were 532 Whitworth, wouldn't go through the holes of the Trix set. Hence, oh dear, well, and I think that's one of the reasons why Trix never quite took off, because, as I say, I in fact have not here, I have a very, very large cupboard full of just Trix, and they produced again instruction manuals, and if you look at our big Meccano crane, which is about one of the finest models that you can make with Meccano, you'll discover that Trix made a rather equivalent one. I've never always wanted to, in fact, make a Trix block crane, but I don't think I got time to do it. I probably have the bits to do it, but not the time. So, well, I went on to Trix construction sets we're talking about then. And of course, the interesting, again, look at the history, is to move from simple bricks, like Lots bricks, but always, when we think of Lots, think of Richter, because the range of Richter bricks is, if you go to the continent and see one of their collections, is quite remarkable. And I say we have an interesting little sample of it here. But otherwise, construction sets, there's a gap, but there's of course a question of the gaps produced by war and the inability to make things. That, for example, Meccano, Hornby, had these major factories, Binns Road in Liverpool, and of course without those and all the others, we probably would have lost the last war. Because everybody was busy making warlike products, and the question is, at the end of the war, so often they didn't recover, and it's a question of the. I mean, this is partly your field, I think, of the economics of what's going on. It's splendid to come into a place like this and see absolutely splendid things, but one should think behind it into you know, right, who does this, who produces it, and why? And again, it took me a long time to come round to that. I think I went to one of the toy fairs at Olympia. I forget what the firm was called, who discovered the firm. Oh, in fact, we used to, in the early 25 years ago, in this place, we in fact arranged for our things to sell in the toy shop here. Came from this place, who was in fact importing from China and other places things because they're just not very available. I forgot. There was quite a variety of nice things, but they weren't being made here. What were they? Audrey would remind me. It's when we ran the little shop in the far corner.
Yes. Well, didn't we have the lithographed tin plate stuff from China?
No, I don't think we've had. I don't think, in fact, the Chinese have ever produced much tin plate, though there has been, for the past 10, 15 years, possibly more, a number of the established firms in this country, in Germany, to some extent in France, have in fact turned their manufacturing to China. And Märklin, of course, who are one of the oldest, mainly model railway, but other things, manufacturers, I think Märklin date from, is it 1880 or 1860? And the whole town of Göppingen is just Märklin. But they, in fact, you suddenly discovered about 12, 15 years ago that actually they're very fine models, particularly in 00 gauge. No, Märklin have been still producing up to 01 and 2 gauge things. Well, in fact, being made in China. Because the Chinese are extremely clever at doing all sorts of things. I've been to China and a couple of times, and it is a truth that these Chinese, they're clever. To me, well, a nice way, in a productive way, and they are clever. And they will take on things. It's like, you see, currently the best, you can get some beautiful binding. I bet some of these books were printed in China. Currently they are doing, you know, a tremendous amount. If you have a really nice book to produce, get it out to China.
Michael collects books as well as lots of other things. We've got nearly an hour. So I'm going to wrap it up in a minute. I think when we get the video equipment, we'll get you back and just do a sort of 10-15 minute wander around the museum. But I've got one more question before we wrap it up that we haven't touched on at all. I think I'm still looking to find someone who says, no, I never had one of those. Teddy bears. I've never met anyone who said, no, I never had one.
Interesting. You didn't have one.
No, I did, but I'm looking to meet the person that didn't. Did you?
I would think that, let's just think about being at the old rectory in rural Worcestershire, and one of my little friends was called Gordon, who lived in the black and white cottage just near the entrance drive. Agricultural labourer. Gordon was, again, about my age, about 8 or 9. I wouldn't think Gordon had a teddy bear. Aww. I wouldn't think that a majority of agricultural labour children has ever had a teddy bear.
But I haven't met Gordon. Did you have a teddy bear?
Yeah, well, you see, I did. And I think a teddy bear of my time would undoubtedly be a middle class thing, because I rather have a feeling that you'll find more of so-called aristocracy, so-called upper class, not having teddy bears. I think teddy bear was a more. It's an interesting. I'm sure there is a good history of the teddy bear somewhere, and it'd be interesting to look at that. But I certainly had a teddy bear at the age of 3.5 or 4, and it was quite a big one. It was, I think, a Chad Valley. I think it was a Chad Valley, and it had a voice, and it was called Banks. And why was it called Banks? Because my father thought it rather resembled one of his fellow form masters at Shrewsbury School.
That's lovely. Well, we'll stop there for today.
Okay. About it much, but the thought did occur to me for the Collector's Gazette. I think I occasionally wrote the odd thing, and you know, collectors, classification of collectors.
Go on.
Jackdaws, magpies, squirrels, and king squirrels. Jackdaws are just interested in a shiny object. Magpies tend to store objects a bit. Squirrels collect nuts for the winter, but king squirrels rather may be particular about which nuts they collect or so on and so forth. But one day at a Christie's sale, it'll be up there in that, there's this the catalogue, I was talking with Tony Manthos, who is of course a trustee of this establishment. He said, "Oh yes, Michael, I do agree, but you've missed one out." I said, "Okay, Tony, tell me." "Oh yes, bowerbirds, who really go to town building a display and so there you are."
So which is Chris?
Interesting.
I think he's a hybrid magpie bowerbird.
I think that's about right. I think that's about right, yes. Yes. As the bowerbirds do it, and they do it elaborately in restaurants, but it has a purpose. And king squirrels has a purpose, but ordinary squirrels, well, they collect, but do they know what they're doing? You see again, I'm not sure what I am, but why do I have what I have, particularly in terms of books? And I'm quite clear that while I like books and will go on liking them, I have them for what is in them, not for their beauty or anything. It's nice to have a nice book, but you know, one isn't